With me this afternoon is McKenna from Spirit-of-Shankly and Andy Burgess from red-road-to-anfield. Welcome, guys, to the show, and thanks for coming on.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
Firstly, I suppose the best way to start is to give a little bit of background information about ourselves. So I suppose, Jay, we could start with you if you want to give a little bit of information about yourself personally and where your involvement with Spirit-of-Shankly is.
Yeah, I am currently the chairperson of Spirit-of-Shankly, Liverpool Supporters Union, which came into formation initially on the 31st of January 2008 on the back of the Hicks and Gillett ownership, which I'm sure we all sadly remember within Liverpool. I got involved, I went along to a public meeting where supporters were discussing what was taking place within the ownership and sort of asking themselves, out loud and amongst each other what we should do. Supporters met in the stand, about 300 of us, and I sort of stuck my hand up and had a say, and had no intention of getting involved, just felt, wanted to make a contribution about what I think we should be doing. I was asked then to come along to an initial meeting of the committee, and we had our first big mass public meeting in February, the 16th of February 2008, prior to the Barnsley FA Cup game that we lost. And I've been involved in Spirit-of-Shankly ever since. So at that first meeting, what had been a think about, having protests about the owners led to the suggestion from the floor, Nicky Alter, a Liverpool writer and football supporter for many and many a year, said that, a city like Liverpool, it's quite surprising we didn't not only have an active fan group, but we didn't actually have, a football supporters union. Liverpool is a very union city, so the suggestion was that we create a union, and there were a number of issues that affected supporters at the time around not just the ownership, but travel prices. There was Michael Shields, the Liverpool supporter, was incarcerated at the time, and supporters had been supporting that campaign on quite an ad hoc basis. So it was said, we need to give a voice to supporters, and that's what Spirit-of-Shankly was set up for. Obviously, I'll fast forward through the Hicks and Gillett days. We were involved in and leading on, the protests around that. On the same day as, and this fits with obviously some of the topic of conversation that will come up today around supporter ownership, the same day that Spirit-of-Shankly had its first meeting on the 31st of January, Rogan Taylor and a number of others had a meeting where they formally launched what they called Share Liverpool FC. And their intention was around supporter ownership, to try and bring about supporter ownership of Liverpool FC for initially, if you recall, £5,000 a share. So they launched, alongside that. It was never our intention at that first meeting around supporter ownership. But obviously, as that, Hicks and Gillett campaign progressed, there was active and more serious thought given to the idea of how we, look to remove the owners and whether the option, when there was no potential buyers on the scene, there was a period between when Dubai backed off and NESV, as they were known at the time, but FSG and others came to the fore in late 2010. There was a period where there was nobody on the scene, and supporters actively, sought out ways to bring about supporter ownership. That's where Spirit-of-Shankly become closer in working to Share Liverpool. A new organisation for a period was set up with Spirit-of-Shankly stroke Share Liverpool as a sort of one body, trying to bring about supporter ownership. There was some revision to how they would do that, with suggestions of £500 a share at the time. Once Liverpool was bought, that and Share Liverpool, just to say at the time, where the Supporters Trust registered with Supporters Direct, Liverpool didn't have a Supporters Trust, and I think there were some supporters having conversations in 2005 about setting one up, but at that time Robert Kraft became interested in buying the club, and those conversations stopped, I believe. So then, obviously, post FSG taking charge, and I recall Share Liverpool had a meeting with John Henry, Tom Werner, and Ian Ayre the Monday after they'd bought the club. On the Friday, if people want to jog the memory of that, it was the day after we'd played Everton with Roy Hodgson in charge, when he'd claimed it was our best ever away performance under him, when we'd been spanked 3-0 at Goodison Park. So it sticks in the memory for a number of different reasons. But we as SOS also met them, and then not long after that, the people who'd been involved in Share Liverpool stepped aside. They weren't wanting to still pursue that. we as SOS, where we'd had that, ultimately our aim was of supported ownership of Liverpool Football Club. I was doing a number of interviews about it at the time. And within that, and it might come up, but I'll touch on it here. It might be something people want to explore more. Is in the summer of 2010, sort of pre John Henry and Tom Werner, becoming public and being interested in buying Liverpool. If you recall, from that April time onwards, Barclays Capital had become involved in the run of the club. RBS obviously was the principal owner of the debt, but Barclays Capital become involved. Martin Broughton, who was the chairman for a while, was brought in on their behest to try and bring about this sale. And SOS and Share Liverpool representatives did meet with Barclays Capital to explore the idea, or they say explore, we would probably say they really wanted to just tick the box of saying they'd done it, about potential supported ownership. Similarly, at the time, some of our representatives had been meeting with finance, people from the world of finance to talk to them about supported ownership, how it could be structured and why. Obviously, this was on the back of a financial crash, which made it more difficult to do. But there was certainly interest in trying to push that. And similarly, we met some MPs to have some conversations with them about ways they felt it could be supported. There was even the suggestion, that RBS was effectively state owned at the time, and we as taxpayers owned it, and they owned by default Liverpool Football Club because of the debt. Yeah. So was there something to be done there? So that's where it sort of went up to, and since then, and obviously I won't preempt the rest of the agenda, where there's obviously conversations about what is or isn't happening around supported ownership, but that's sort of where SOS has been on this. As I say, I got involved since the beginning around campaigns, and for the last few years I've been the chair of the organisation, and still continue to do so.
Brilliant. That's very clear and concise, I think. Andy, the same, I suppose, applies to you. If you want to give a kind of a brief history about yourself and where Red Road to Anfield comes in.
Yeah. Last summer, I became aware of the spirit-of-shankly as an organisation. Sadly, not prior to that. Don't ask me why. And I basically looked at their agenda and agreed with essentially what they stood for, which ultimately was fan ownership. Mm-hmm. So I looked into what had gone on, relevant issues that Jay's just discussed, the Share Liverpool scheme, etc. Saw, should I say, some fault with it, decided it was time to get in touch with the spirit-of-shankly and ask them the very question, how are you going to achieve said goal? So I went up to Liverpool with my partner, met with Jay and two of his colleagues, where we briefly discussed what would be the next step, for want of a better term. Mm-hmm. It was an issue whether they wanted to actually consider fan ownership, given that they stated it on their website. So that was my mindset. Sadly, from the meeting, and I don't wish, again, I'm not pointing the finger, we essentially agreed to work collectively towards putting together an agenda for the objective. That didn't happen, and since then I've made several attempts to get the conversation going. So basically, to outline what I set up red-road-to-anfield, for want of a better term, as a vehicle to get the discussion going, and to see whether it got any support. Sadly, 2,000 plus people coming onto a website doesn't show the sort of support I would have expected from that sort of topic of conversation. I simply have requested to the spirit-of-shankly, the next move would be to do a feasibility study, which you'd expect to do if you're trying to raise the source of money as we're discussing. And that's where I stand today. I believe a feasibility study is required, and I'm ready to get involved as and when requested. That's me.
Cool. Well, thanks for that. I suppose that kind of leads us on, and you touched on it briefly there, about Share LFC, Share Liverpool FC, Jay. Yeah. Basically, Spirit-of-Shankly have had a position of fan ownership in agreement with Share Liverpool FC since 2010, when the club was under the ownership.
just to be clear, sorry, it is just Spirit of Shankly now. Liverpool actually don't exist as an organisation. They sort of, as I say before, just stepped aside.
Yeah. Well, actually, Andy, I wasn't aware of that. Actually, when I was doing the questions, it was actually Andy that did make me aware of that.
Yeah.
But just in saying that, under the guidance of Tom Hicks and George Gillette, given the state that the club was in at the time, was fan ownership looked at as a matter of urgency to get Hicks and Gillette out, or was it more of a long-term goal?
Well, it's both. If that, without trying to sound like that's a fudge of an answer, because it isn't. At the time, as I said to you before, we sat down with our members and people who were getting involved in Spirit of Shankly from 2008 onwards about, what do we want from Liverpool Football Club? Because the intention was to provide the voice. So it was, what do we want from LFC? And, supporters were saying there's a number of things we think we should strive to try and achieve. Given voice, dealing with the very immediate pressing issues around the ownership of Hicks and Gillette, that was the immediate aim when we initially set out. That was, was of vital importance to what happened with Liverpool Football Club. But then, as a supporters union, we wanted to set out to people that we weren't just a one-trick pony, so to speak. We wanted to do a number of things to make things better for supporters. So we got involved in obviously providing travel. We've managed to do that successfully for a number of years. Been cheaper in most cases than even the club's official operators and other operators on travel. We've made representations to the police and on stewarding and the way we're policed at football matches. So we regularly go to meetings ahead of the Merseyside derby and matches at Manchester United, namely because they've been problem fixtures in the past. The result of that kind of thing, I'm just explaining what we were trying to do at the time was, about giving people a voice. We were locked in usually after the match, weren't allowed access to the toilets. And it was when we were talking to people about these very practical issues, people were saying to us, well, the way all this is fixed is supporter ownership. At the time, governance was high on the agenda of football clubs. Liverpool were going through their troubles. Manchester United through their very well publicised ones. Portsmouth had been through it about a dozen times because of the failings of governance in the game. Wimbledon had their issues around moving, and what we established was there's loads of problems in the game, and we knew people at Supporters Direct and were talking to them. We knew people at other supporters trusts, and I don't think, and this is where I think some of this comes from, I don't think there's an ill in the game of football, be it pricing, be it policing, be it fixture changes, that can't be fixed by having supporters involved in the running of the football clubs. Germany is an example of that, but I don't think there's something that can't be fixed. So supporters were saying to us, what do we do to get a voice? And we then put forward some aims which were adopted around fan representation on the board. And they were conversations that were suggested when we met at DIC when they were initially interested in buying the club. We met them and they suggested, that there'd be fan representation. But as well as that, we were saying, we didn't want to be at the behest of an owner to, give or take this away from you. And the way to guarantee that is either a stake in the ownership of the club, a la what Swansea have. But obviously that comes with its problems because it can be bought from you. You don't have the same, you can't keep it forever unless an owner's willing to. Or ultimately to own the club. And, I think what had happened, the supporters were saying, if only we'd have bought it off, David Moores for £174 million in, 2007, just think where we'd be now. Yeah. So we had it as an aim. And obviously share Liverpool, and that was, we believe it would make the game better. But obviously at the time with Hicks and Gillette, it was like, as I said, there was that period in between DIC, not pursuing a bid, and then FSG and others coming to the fore again, where the ownership of the club wasn't going anywhere. It was just sort of drifting along. They clearly were struggling with finances, and we began to investigate seriously the opportunity for supporter ownership. And as I say, that became a pressing thing as the future of the club became more precarious, certainly in 2009. If you remember that, obviously the transfer window of the summer of 2009 when, we sold many players and bought just a few. We didn't have the money to replace them. It began to impact on the transfer budget. And then obviously 2010, going to the High Court, we'd seen how precarious it was. So we began to explore it more as a pressing issue, working with Share Liverpool, more hands-on. SOS and Share Liverpool came together to do that. Regular meetings about ways it can be done. We revised with them their plans and relaunched their share plans, which were initially £5,000, and had upset quite a few people because, Rogan Taylor, and not to disparage him, but, we've had this frank conversation with Rogan, and, where he'd come and spoke at a meeting of ours where he'd said, a £5,000 share, it's only the price of a second-hand, Volkswagen Polo. And, I think it completely missed the point of where people were at in terms of what they could afford.
Yeah.
So we set up a new way of trying to do that with a £500 share. We started working with Partners Credit Union based in the city, which would help people save for that. And I set one up at the time. So you had an opportunity to save in a credit union, which was a good thing. We set up season ticket loans for supporters instead of them having to use credit cards to pay for the season ticket alongside that. But you had a shared account in which you could save a sum of money continuously to do that. Mm-hmm. Obviously, then what happened then once FSG come in and the club, I don't agree with this phrase, but the sense from a lot of supporters at the time was Liverpool was saved. I think that's the wrong thing, because I don't think FSG saved us. I think, it wasn't a benevolent act. They did come in, but, Liverpool, the headlines were Liverpool was saved from the brink of bankruptcy. The High Court made a decisive decision. Liverpool could be sold. And it happened with some of the people involved in Share Liverpool. It happened in, some of the conversations people were wanting to have with us of, well, that there was a window of opportunity where supporter ownership might have been right there at the forefront, because there was as I mentioned before, there was obviously, because it involved RBS, who was state owned, who wanted to get this debt off their books because of the financial crisis within the world at the time. They certainly didn't like the bad publicity and Gillette were causing for them. We had some conversations with people at RBS, for example, about this. There was clearly a concern they had. And there was a unique sort of set of circumstances that came together to say, well, do we have this opportunity? As it was, we finally got that meeting with Barclays Capital to pursue that with them, because there was no sense in talking to the club, because, the directors of the club were having to do what the owners wanted them to do for a period, if you recall, obviously, until, that's why it obviously went to the High Court. They were doing what they wanted them to do. They, the owners didn't want to sell, certainly not to anyone, let alone supporters. They didn't want to sell it for the cost of the debt. So, we had that conversation that we did after much pursuing with Barclays Capital. And, slightly disappointingly for us, we think Barclays Capital were doing that more of a box-ticking exercise to say, well, we've explored all the options, there's no other option. I think they were genuinely considering the idea that they might have to pull the plug on financing Liverpool, and all that would have come with that. And then not long after, Fenway Sports Group, I think it was around the September time, public interest from them became public knowledge, as it did from prospective other owners. There was the Peter Lim story, that there were other Americans, there was Middle Eastern interest supposedly. So that come to the fore, and that killed any conversations around supporter ownership, because the people who could sell us the club, the banks, the people who owed the debt, backed off because they were happy to go and go for the easier option. So it's still, there was an opportunity at that point, and it's still been on our agenda. We've still done work around that since. We had meetings with government where we've been involved in supporters direct conversations at Parliament about how you get fan ownership and structured engagement. Only recently there was a government expert working group on supporter ownership and fan engagement, which disappointingly didn't give enough thought to the idea of how you get fan ownership at the higher level in the Premier League. And that's a concern we've raised with colleagues at the Supporters Trust in Manchester and at Manchester United, at Arsenal, at Chelsea, that supporter ownership at our level through government assistance is more challenging. There needs to be a revision of that. I think the government and the authorities only ever really see, and even the Premier League and the Football League, they only ever really see supporter ownership, in the cases of Portsmouth, for example. The club's gone to the wall, so supporters, everybody else has given up on the idea of doing it, so supporters step in. But in the meantime, we've still look to move along the path towards that. You'd be literally at this point in time going from 0 to 60. So we've continued to push along for doing that. We got Anfield recognised as an asset of community value. Now, what that meant was that if Anfield goes up for sale, either because Liverpool want to move or namely because Liverpool want to sell the club, the owners have to notify us. Now, we wouldn't buy Anfield on its own, I imagine. No one wants an empty football stadium if there isn't a stadium in it, if there isn't a team to play in it, not the team we support anyway. But what it would do is that would alert us to an opportunity, to the idea that Liverpool was for sale. Yeah. And the benefit that gives us is you don't have to display any money, but you get to say to them within a couple of week time window, you're interested in trying to buy Anfield. What that allows us to then do is go to the prospective owner and say, well, is there an opportunity here for supporter involvement? And then similarly, one of the most recent things that we were involved in as well, the Labour government, the Labour opposition in May of 2015, obviously they lost the general election, but we'd worked with the Labour Party as supporters trusts to influence their manifesto. And one of their a couple of their key manifesto pledges were for supporter representation on the boards of football clubs. So that meant that if Labour had been elected in May 2015, and we all have other views on what the impact of that would or wouldn't have been if that had happened. But if Labour had been elected in May 2015, they were promising that in the first 100 days of their premiership, they would pass legislation that allowed supporter trusts, of which SOS is the supporter trust at Liverpool, to appoint directors to the board of the club. So, we hear a conversation about workers on boards, but Labour Party said we would allow you to appoint directors to the board of the club. So you wouldn't need to own a stake, but you would be a director. And that's a first in. And, I'll touch on why I think that's important in a second. Secondly, they also had a pledge around a transfer window so that when football clubs went up for sale, so FSG want to sell Liverpool, the Glazers want to sell Manchester United, that supporters trusts would also have the opportunity to buy 10%. So there would be a pause in a sale process that allowed supporters to buy 10% of their club. So that would give you the time to do it. Now, one of the challenges I think we've got about supporter ownership, and this is from conversations we've had with supporters and members and others, is I don't think they think it's realistic. From experience, they've raised concerns. They've asked, how would it work? Are you sure it could happen? Liverpool wouldn't want you to do it. A million and one different things that they've said. Having a director on the board, if Labour's policies are to come in, and we'll still be pushing for those kinds of things, demonstrates you can do it. Demonstrates, look, we've gone in and done this, and we've been really good at it, and we've achieved that. Similarly, one of the other problems we found, and Barclays Capital were talking to us about this, in terms of raising the money to buy a share Liverpool had set up two initiatives, £5,000 a share and £500 a share, asking people to put money in. And this was at a time when Liverpool Football Club was nearly going bankrupt. And they didn't get nearly the amount of pledges they'd liked, nor the amount of money offered. And what they found from research of this, and Barclays Capital said the same, is until it was seen as a reasonable, as reasonably likely, i.e. the club was for sale and they come out and said, we're interested in supporters wanting to buy it, or we're interested in selling it to supporters wouldn't put their money in. So we were in a very weird chicken and egg situation, and we said the same to Barclays, because Barclays Capital at the time were telling us this conversation needs to be confidential, and we were like, well, we're not going to do that, but you need to come out and say you would consider selling to the supporters. Now, as I say before, we thought it was box ticking because they wouldn't do this. But if they'd have come out and said, we'll actively consider the idea of selling to supporters, then our campaigns around refinancing the club in for the supporters, of which we had a demonstration a few weeks later about that, would have been a more realistic prospect to go to supporters and say, here's someone on the record want to say this. Now, it's why I think a lot of attention has been focused on Ian Ayre's recent comments about this. We have raised a number of times with Liverpool the idea of supporter investments. In that very first meeting we had with FSG, as I said before, we said to them, you've just got your feet under the table, you've been in, the job 3 days, here's what's happened so far. We think there's an opportunity to work with supporters. we'll send you the document, we'll send you some ideas, you know, a bit about who we are and what's what. We did that. We sent that over to them before they flew back to the States. We didn't get a reply. So then we sent them a longer document, and we essentially, you know, I'm sure you won't mind me swearing about this, but we essentially got a 4-page reply from Liverpool in response to some of that might as well have just literally typed in one sentence, "fuck off."
Yeah.
They didn't want to know. And that included us suggesting that as part of the commitment to a stadium, whether that be a redeveloped Anfield or a new one, there was an opportunity for support and investment. You know, because it's you buying into something that's real and it's there and it's present. You know, we talked about supporter, you know, representation in the board and whether they'd actively consider selling a stake to repair, you know, not just because we had any questions about FSG at the time, but more because there was a huge relationship that needed repairing between the club and the ownership, even though it had changed. And you trust in ownership of clubs, as you know, with the supporters who for 3 years have had to battle against, you know, very bad owners. And we said, here's an opportunity to bring people on board. You know, they talked about us all pulling in the same direction, and they didn't want to do that. So, you know, in our document, for example, we'd cited Shankly's Holy Trinity quote, you know, the manager, the players, and the fans all pulling in the same direction kind of thing. They actually wrote back to us, and, you know, I'll never forget this. They wrote back to us and said, well, it's not a triangle anymore, it's a square. And it's the three from, you know, Shankly's Trinity of the manager, the players and the fans, but it now does include the owners and the directors. And then they suggested, you know, which I'm quite not sure they proofread this, they suggested that we all row in the same direction. Now, if you're on a square and you're all rowing in the same direction, I think it just keeps going round and round and round. You know, the point they were clearly trying to make, aside from not having made it very well, was that they believed they were as integral now to the club, and their idea of supporter investment was not one that they wanted to pursue. And that's something we've had back from them. I know this is a very long answer, but that's something we've had back from them repeatedly until this moment when Graham Smith, who had been involved in all those meetings with Barclays Capital way back in 2010, as I mentioned before, and had been involved in the Share Liverpool stuff and has been a part of Spirit-of-shankly since, and is now on the supporters committee, until he mentioned that question again. And we get this, you know, this one sentence from Ian Ayre that seems to maybe offer an opportunity again where, hang on, maybe there's something in this that needs exploring. So that's where we've been on supporter ownership, you know.
Yeah. And just to touch on what you said there, you mentioned the fact that, you know, you have to be consulted in any sale because of the arrangement around the ground. How much notice has to be given in that regard for of any intention to move ground or whatever the case may be?
I'd have to check, but see, now, well, there's two things to say on that. The assets of community value legislation, just to point on, was part of what the government done on localism. They didn't actually intend for it to be for football supporters. They didn't actually plan to say that you could bid for your ground. And the person who wrote the legislation, you know, got a lot of questions off this. Eric Pickles was the government minister at the time, but they subsequently backed that. Our understanding is it's around 6 weeks. So, but not that there's 6 weeks. They give you 6 weeks prior notice. They give you notice to say this is happening. You have, I think, a 2-week window in which you need to say whether you're going to bid or not.
Yeah.
And then you get the other 4 weeks to try and get the money together. So, you know, take Liverpool out of the equation. You know, this is people who, you know, want to do it for the village hall, so maybe only need to find 60 grand or 70 grand. You know, obviously we'd be looking to try and have to find hundreds of millions of pounds, but it gives you that window of an opportunity. The challenge will be, if and when that comes about, what legal challenges the football clubs will put forward against that. So when we got Anfield recognised as an asset to community value, we were shared with the correspondence from the club's solicitors, DLA Piper, was shared with us. And in that, they've questioned the legitimacy of such a policy. Clearly, none of them have challenged it yet. And that maybe says one of two things. One, that the legislation is watertight, or two, they don't want to actually do that until they need to, because they would create a storm, I'm sure, of you know what this means. So that's just sort of, I think, just needs to be understood about what this assets community value legislation means and meant at the time.
Yeah. And Andy, you touched on it briefly in kind of your background, saying that you approached SOS with a view to including Red Road to Anfield in the process to buy the club. What role did you see Red Road to Anfield playing in that process?
It was essentially a vehicle to communicate with the supporters. Doesn't have to be Red Road to Anfield. It can be the spirit-of-shankly as it is. I've obviously listened intently with what Jay just said. I think the bottom line is, and where I still stand is, given you state you want to achieve the goal, Jay, I don't think having 6 weeks to try and sort of bring together many hundreds of millions of pounds would be a good strategy. I still believe, and I'm sure many people do, if the spirit-of-shankly showed its cards on this subject and looked long-term to put in place, because it will happen at some point. The club will come up for sale at some point.
Yeah, it will.
Whatever the price might be. Having 6 weeks to try and acquire that sort of money would be, now I won't say impossible. One of your chaps on the board recently stated at the AGM that you believe you could raise 60 or 70 million quid in 10 minutes.
Hello?
Sorry about that. I lost my earpiece. If you've got the goal of either being represented on the board, which means acquiring shares, if that's the case, which would be the best route, why don't you initiate people getting involved and signing up to the said deal and see how it works? It's better to fail than not truly try at all. Just to state it.
So what you are saying, this comes back, doesn't it, to the crux of the issue we've had. Yeah. That no doubt has, prompted this podcast and, prompted, which I must say, and I won't be afraid of saying, has prompted some absolutely ridiculous behaviour from some supporters, of which, Andy has shared in towards individuals at SOS, that other supporters groups have shared in. Some frankly ridiculous behaviour. I must say that, I've never shied away from having a conversation with people. I agreed to do this straight away. I've got no reason to hide from anyone. I've agreed to do a couple of other podcasts based on my views on what John Henry said about ticket prices preventing the Anfield Road. People who vehemently disagree with me and, have called me a myriad of names. But, I'll front up to that. But if people want to have a conversation, as we did with Andy, that's fine. But similarly, it comes into what Andy's saying, people also need to respect that some of us just might disagree. Some of us might say, well, we tried that. We don't believe that works. Not because we don't want it to. The sense that seems to come across in some of this is that we somehow, don't want supporter ownership at Liverpool. As in we aren't trying. It's not that. We've sat down, as I said before, with banks. We give all our time. We're all volunteers. We give all our time to commit to doing this. In relation to Andy saying it there. It was referenced earlier when we were chatting about. We had a meeting together and talked about it. We did, and Andy came to us with what he said was he had an idea to put it together. Some of the things he suggested we'd already considered. Some of the things we'd had conversations with others about trying. We've looked at the experiences of what other clubs and other trusts who've done this have tried to do it. And if Red Road to Anfield had an idea that come along and I thought, oh my God, that is how you get supporter ownership, then we would happily get involved. We had a conversation as a management committee about doing that. Just because we didn't adopt one idea or one person's view doesn't mean that we're not going to do nothing else. Doesn't mean that we're not still considering the options. Doesn't mean that we, still won't look to try and find a solution. But equally, just because someone has an idea and someone else hasn't got an idea at that, or in someone else's mind, they don't have an idea at the time, doesn't mean you have to take that idea. Not all ideas are good ideas. Not all ideas work for different circumstances. And, we are still looking at all the options for sports ownership. As I said before, we talk to all the other trusts in the Premier League, and there is a common consensus amongst them, that is supporter ownership likely. Liverpool Football Club was for sale for, to FSG for, with the debt included, let's say £300 million it was. 300 to 350 million pound once they paid the debt off. The day they signed to take ownership of that, the value of Liverpool went up. You know, when we met Andy last year, you know, I had a conversation with Andy, and I sharing, you know, without breaking any confidence of things we spoke about. But I said to Andy, you know, me as Jay McKenna, give you an example. If I win the Euro Millions tomorrow, and I go to Liverpool Football Club, and I go to Ian Eyre, and I say to him, right, here's me, Jay McKenna, nothing to do with, you know, not asking for it on behalf of the fans, but me, Jay McKenna, I've won £50 million on the Euro Millions, 50 million euros, whatever you want to call it. I go in and say to them, I want to buy 10% of Liverpool. This was when we were guessing that say Liverpool was £500 million. Ian Eyre would laugh me out of the room, because they wouldn't give us an in, because they've had their fingers burnt, they perceive, on dealing with supporters. Look at the walkout. Since the walkout, Liverpool don't want to speak to supporters to such an extent they're now doing a review of the supporter engagement they have with their own supporters committee, because they don't like that essentially supporters told them they were wrong. And the challenge you've got is both getting what you want of supporter representation or supporter stake in the club, and giving the club enough reason to do it, giving them enough carrot. And that's where I do think, and we said it to Andy last year, and it's come up again now based on the Ian Eyre comments, the carrot to the club to do it is either, you know, legislation, it's coming anyway. You know, if Labour had got in power, it's coming anyway. So, you know, get ahead of the curve and do it with us. Or you want to build a stand, supporters want you to build a stand, you don't think the financials stack up to do it. So maybe if supporters get a stake, they'll give you the money to do it. You know, what you've also got to factor in is now, you know, the value is over £1 billion. You know, the suggestion of what they want to sell to prospective Chinese buyers is anywhere between 1.2 and, you know, 1.5 billion pound. Even if we raised £60 million, that would get us, what, 5%, 7%, 8%, depending on the value. Say something like that. You don't get for that money a seat on the board. You don't get for that money access to the club's financial information. You don't. 1 second. You don't get for that, a guarantee you can change policy. Now, I think that's still a good first step. But then saying to loads of, you know, the hundreds of thousands of supporters you get involved in this, well, what am I getting for my money? Well, what you're getting is a share certificate, essentially. And I think that's a challenge. I think you've got to have something where you say, for this, you get a voice or you get a say. And that opportunity just isn't there in my mind. And, you know, obviously, Andy disagrees. And, you know, if Andy can think of a way for us to do that, you know, I'd be all ears, like any supporter listening to this, if they can come along and say, we've got any idea. But I just think also, you know, I think we shouldn't, you know, portray what happened last year when we had a conversation as somehow us not wanting to do it, us dismissing people out of hand. And, you know, subsequently, that, you know, some of the, and not Andy, I hasten to add, but some of the people who've been in and around this, who've began to suggest some very outlandish things, some very potentially, you know, dodgy legal ground things, suggesting we're in the pocket of FSG, that we're paid off, and things like that is incredibly questionable. Regardless of what I think about them saying that to me, and not even having the decency to try and say it to my face, I just think, well, some of these people are saying to me, you should listen to us as a group. You know, we want you to listen to us and work with us. And then deciding to call us out. It's like, well, that's no way to even have a harmonious relationship, let alone work together.
Can I just say, I fully agree with what Jay just said there, what happened with certain people and certain conversations. And in actual fact, it mainly happened on Twitter, I believe. I wasn't even aware that was going on. My name was being used. I was being tagged into things, so on and so forth. I wasn't behind that. And indeed, I'm not going to apologise on that person's behalf. But as far as what Jay's just discussed there, all I'm trying to suggest is, and all I've reasonably asked for, Jay, and I, regardless of my ideas or anyone else, is to come together and put together a feasibility study. What ifs will all come into it. Now, those ideas won't all come from myself, but I'll certainly give an outline, and I certainly have sent you an outline of where I think it should be done. raising that sort of capital won't be done. There's many reasons why people will give money, be it charitable, be it wanting to get a return on the money. We have to explore every possibility, hence the reason, and I still believe it's a reasonable suggestion to put a group of people together with the ability to put a feasibility study together, and that would be the starting point. That's all I suggest. All the ifs, all the buts, how much it would be, are totally irrelevant at this point. We've got to have the want to achieve your goal.
And as you touched on earlier, Jay, as well, just before you do address that, you mentioned the fact of maybe, you know, this investment in the new stand and the development maybe gaining somewhere up to 7% of a stake in the club.
Yeah.
Surely it's better to have some kind of a foothold to build on rather than, you know, to maybe not do anything at all. Because I know there are suggestions out there. Now, I don't know where these have come from, but there are rumours that there's talk of maybe letting fans block buy season tickets for years ahead in order to finance this. So surely option A is better than option B in terms of ownership.
I wholeheartedly agree. I mentioned before, you know, maybe you misheard or I haven't put myself across appropriately. I agree. I think having 1% of the club is better than having nothing. You know, and if Liverpool can manage to give away a percentage share, you know, LeBron James owns more of Liverpool than any of us put together because Liverpool, because Fenway Sports Group give him a bit of that as a sweetener for, you know, signing him up as a client. I think that's absurd. But I recall, you know, and this is where our experience on what we've talked about comes in. I recall us reacting angrily to that and saying, you know, one, Liverpool shouldn't be used for some kind of, you know, cross-marketing purposes for Fenway Sports Management to attract new clients. And secondly, if it's worthwhile for LeBron James to get a share, then why can't we? You know, and I don't know.
What would stop him selling his share?
Well, I'm assuming he's, you know, they've never publicly disclosed how much he owns.
But you quite rightly said he owns more than us. Well, what would stop him as an individual?
Well, I suspect. This is my point. I suspect because we also never found out how much he owns. I suspect probably in the contract there'll be something that says, you know, I suspect we're only guessing. I suspect it's LeBron James has a thing that says, well, if you want to sell this, you sell it back to us. Kind of thing. Essentially, it's ours. You just get this on a nice little share portfolio, and if and when Liverpool's ever sold, you get the value of that share at that appropriate point in time. You know, But what we found, and I think this is an interesting point because it fits in with what supporters perceive about ownership. When we said that, we had supporters, many of whom I recall, and you know, you notice the names and people even I know, you know, relatively close to me in supporter terms of people who, you know, stop and have a conversation with outside the ground and stuff like that and share a pint with, saying to me, you know, you're making a big deal out of this. It's nothing to worry about. You know, Fenway are great. You know, he's only got, you know, people were suggesting to me, oh, he's only got 0.1% of a share. He's got 0.5%. They were making numbers up because they just didn't believe it mattered. And when I was saying, well, okay, regardless of whether that's right or wrong, surely it's right that we should get the opportunity to do the same thing. Well, it's not the same. You know, he's just getting it. You should want to get a say and have a voice. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's exactly what supporters would want to do. And our experience for a while on that is a lot of supporters, as and when we would criticise FSG for not listening to supporters, would tell us to back off. And that's a challenge. Now, the point Andy raised before, you know, of how you, you know, do this and ways to figure out doing this. Well, we do that already, and I know it's going to preempt the question Andy said he wanted to ask earlier on, but we do that. We have a spirit-of-shankly management committee. We have a trust, and we will listen to ideas. What happened in the case there with Andy is Andy come along with a relative idea and floated ideas to us about wanting us to set up a feasibility study to do this. That would need funding. Andy wanted us to put him in touch with different people to do this, and we were like, well, that's not stuff we haven't looked at before. You know, we take this away and consider it as a management committee. And it was felt as a management committee that wouldn't be the appropriate way to go at that time. Now, Andy disagreed, and that is, you know, Andy's prerogative to disagree. But equally, it is ours to say we don't agree. Now, we are, as I said, the recognised supporters to us. We still continue to work on this. You know, we continue to speak to supporters direct. We're engaging in the club's review process of supporter engagement at the moment. We still speak to supporters direct, do are trying to look at, ways they can improve structured dialogue and engagement with clubs alongside still pursuing supporter ownership, which is an issue because of, as I said before, the costs, but also I think, the political push to get supporters involved in running clubs has waned since we've actually stopped bad owners being allowed to take charge of football clubs by and large. And it's when I say bad owners, I'm not saying they're all good. I mean bad owners in the sense of, people who use leverage buyouts to buy them, who, in the case of Portsmouth, in some cases don't apparently even exist. We've still continued to push those things, and we still continue to do that. Now, if people come to us and want to share ideas and ways in which to do it, then, as I said before, we are all open to ideas. I'm having a chat with a few supporters next week who've talked to us about, as I mentioned before, about the idea, and this was a few people on Twitter who'd mentioned it. You mentioned before about supporters buying season tickets in advance. Now, I think that's a dangerous thing because when we say here, well, here's an opportunity for supporters to help you pay for this, and in return we want a stake, there's every danger that what Liverpool say is what you said there. There's option B. Well, we'll let you pay for your season ticket 10 years in advance, a bit like, Club Wembley, the Devonshires you can have there. You pay for it well in advance, and before you know it, supporter ownership, as you've missed that opportunity to get a stake in return for it because, supporters were willing to just jump the queue and buy a season ticket in advance. Now, that would be, I think that would also have very, very dangerous consequences for, how ticketing works at Anfield because, surely, there's the argument of who's more valuable to you as a supporter. Well, if someone's just gone and put, 10 years worth of money in one go, there's certainly a question, isn't there, about, who gets cup final tickets. I suspect people who've paid a chunk of money in one go won't want to be treated the same as anybody who's an ordinary Joe.
Exactly,
and as I say, I'm having a conversation with some people next week who've looked at how, other clubs, other sports have actually done this. They've, issued bonds and things like that. And, I don't want us to do that because I don't want us to build the stadium because we want it as supporters. I want us to build the stadium because it's the right thing to do for supporters. I think the owners should just do it, by the way. But if they're not going to, we want it as supporters. We also want a say in the running of the club. So here's a unique set of circumstances for us to try and do that. Now, that isn't, there's any one number of things that FSG can say to us, well, no, that isn't how you do it. But the model for us to use on this, and we'll be speaking to them too, is what Swansea have done. So Swansea Supporters Trust own 21% of their club. Now, they done it in a very different time. They done it when they were literally at the foot of the entire football pyramid. They were, I think weeks away from getting relegated into the conference. The club was in financial turmoil. The supporters bought 21%. And they've come through the leagues and they still own 21%. And they have a supporter director on the board, the owner stake of their club. They do, though, and it makes reference to that challenge of saying to supporters, here's a good way to do it. Because they own 21%. Now, it'd make my eyes water to consider how much money we'd need to raise to get just 21% of the club. They still get ignored, by and large. So when their owners recently sacked the manager and appointed a new one, not that I want supporters to ever get into the role of hiring and firing managers, because I think it's very dangerous, and ground. We only need to read forums and Twitter to see the range of opinions we have on football. But they didn't even get consulted when the club was being sold to American investors, which has now happened. Again, they didn't get told. They only found out when it was in the papers, and they found out from the papers that the chief executive and the chairman had been to meet these investors. And it was only that they reached out to the investors to make sure that they could still retain their 21% because nobody came and spoke to them. So there are challenges in all of this. And this is what I say before about, ways in which we've looked at it. It's not through not wanting to do this. It's through knowing we need to find a solution that works, that meets, the criteria of what we needed to do, of getting a stake, that maybe gives you a bit of a say. That's, realistic in people's mindsets of, it gives you, a substantial stake. We believe we can actually get it. We believe they'd sell it to us. One of the things Ian Ayres, to touch on this, one of the things Ian Ayres said to us in the past when we've said to him about a stake in the club, Ian Ayres said to us, the football club's always for sale. And we were like, well, okay, what's the price? He said, well, it's for sale for someone who wants to name a price. So, imagine trying to go back to our supporters who rightly are all opinionated, you know, and want the best for it. We've learned, you know, we should have an opinion. Certainly in the last 10 years, we've learned how important that is. But if you go along to Liverpool and say, well, go on, we want 10% for, you know, and we'll give you £50 million. Ian Ayre just says to us, no, it's not. It's for sale for more than that. And you get into this very difficult thing. But what I'm saying is, you get into this very difficult thing of, you go to supporters, you ask them for the money, then you go to the club, and the club say, no, it's not for sale for that. You'd only get one or two at best, but most likely one opportunity to do this. You don't get a few opportunities to try and buy a part of your club. You only get what, because otherwise the supporters just disbelieve it'll happen as well, and that's a challenge. It's, you know, it's not without its challenges, and I think that's sometimes lost in the conversation about why we should do it.
John, but just based around what's going on at the moment, you know, based on the fact that this has become an option, surely to God, really we should all be trying to, when I say we, I mean red-road-to-anfield, spirit-of-shankly, and all the groups that are actively pursuing fan ownership should try and work together, because this is going to be, you know, we've 12 months left before this outline plan and permission technically can run out. So surely to God, we should all be trying to work towards the same goal of achieving this, and maybe getting some money in the bank and getting some movement on it. So, you know, if and when this does come about, that we be in a position to act.
Jay,
go on, Andy, I'll let you join in there. Go on.
Thanks. It boils down to the same thing I'm discussing. How things are achieved has to be discussed. You may well have discussed it with numerous people, Jay. I don't know what type of people they were. Totally irrelevant. All I'm suggesting is we come together and we discuss your objective, not mine, not anyone else's. Your stated objective as an organisation.
Well, it is also yours, because you're claiming to have a group there that wants to do this as well.
No, Jay,
not just mine. You are. You said that. That's Jay. You said you're from red-road-to-anfield.
Absolutely, I can answer you. I came to you to just set up red-road-to-anfield, as I stated earlier on, was to possibly use it as a vehicle for fan engagement. Now, what has to happen, Jay? You have to go beyond your current membership figures. I think the Manchester United Supporters Union has got 208,000 members.
208,000 email addresses is what they've got.
That's fine. That's fine, Jay. Well, that would be a good start for anybody. I mean, and again, I'm not, as I stated in the original meeting with you, I think you've got to reach out and develop your number of people supporting the organisation. And I believe they would do that if you had on your agenda, you do have on your agenda, if you brought it to the forefront and said, at some point, fans, Liverpool will come up for sale. At some point, we could go to Liverpool and say, we want a stake in this club. And like Ian Ayre said, it's always for sale. That's a fact. It's a business. We've got a plan. You can't just do that on a whim. You can't raise that sort of money in 6 weeks, as previously discussed, so on and so forth. I don't believe you could raise 60 or 70 million in 10 minutes, as was stated at the AGM. I know that was a flippant remark. But if you could raise 60, 70 million in 10 minutes, if that was the case,
okay,
Andy, how much could be raised over the next 10 years or 5 years? I don't know when it's going to happen.
Can I ask you then? So you say, you know, it's only fair, you know, you're asking me how I think we do, and I've answered, I think, why I think all that's a challenge and stuff like that, and why it's not viable. You say we could get people to start giving us money now. So you, in the next 6 months, how much do you think you can raise? How much do you think supporters can raise in the next 6 months?
No, it's about.
I'm asking. And what do you do to get that?
Jay, I'm just trying to answer you. Essentially, it's about people making a commitment in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't necessarily mean sending money to the Spirit-of-Shankly. As I recently stated, you've done it once before. You set up people's opportunity to get a bank account to save towards whenever that happened. And I thought, and I still believe that's the way forward. I don't know how long it's going to take to get 200, 500, 1 million supporters behind this. Neither do you. But the day we start will be the day we'll find out. And if it fails, it fails.
But this is my point, Andy. We do know what goes into that, because we've tried it when Liverpool was for sale.
You tried it, yeah.
When Liverpool was for sale. And we know from experience how supporters are about that.
Jay, as I say, the reason for a feasibility study would be
well, Andy, this just to come in on that, because you've mentioned the feasibility study a few times, and I think this is important.
Mm-hmm.
You wanted us to pay for that. You wanted us. You wanted us. You said to us, we can get people around the table, and whether we can fund that as an organisation, or whether we can get someone to fund that. Well, all of this work are things that we've tried before. We've sat round the table with finance people. Now, you can say, well, there's a new opportunity to try that again. Well, if your belief in doing that is so worthwhile, I fail to see what stops you and Red Road to Anfield and the other people who you've spoken to from doing that yourself. You claimed, and there's a slightly disingenuous comment from before where you said you didn't see any of this stuff on Twitter. You then did cite a tweet when I'd applied to another individual and said, well, if you and Andy want to start your fan ownership campaign, good luck with that. You did then go and share that. That's still on your Facebook page. That's still on your Twitter, where you claimed I was mocking people wanting to do something. I'm not. If somebody else wants to go and do something, you don't need to be the supporters trust to do that. Well, Leeds United, and I'll give you the example. Leeds United have a supporters trust. There were a consortium of Leeds fans who came together separately, having spoken to Massimo Cellino, with with a plan to buy the club, and save for Massimo Cellino being the rather bizarre character that he is, who one day walked into the room and told them, you can buy it for nothing. Essentially, you've only just got to pay me off the debt. And then the next day changed his mind and wanted an absurd amount of money for it, and then changed his mind again and said it wasn't for sale. He was willing to there was other supporters groups fronting up that thing beyond the supporters trust. So there's nothing to stop other people who believe there's a viable plan for supporter ownership doing that. I wouldn't get in the way of that. If someone comes along and says, we've got a viable plan that supporters get behind for supporter ownership, then we would no doubt back it. But what you're saying to us, and this is the point I'm trying to make, is we just do disagree based on our experiences. You believe it can be done, but based on our experiences, it's not viable. Now, that doesn't stop you or others pursuing that as a campaign if you wish to do so. There have been other supporter groups that have started, at other clubs. There are more than one supporters group. There's one supporters trust, but there's more than one supporters group. They all push different aims and objectives. At Liverpool, it's lesser established, but there are groups of people.
You've got the aim of fan ownership as your objective. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here.
But what's happening, Andy, is you're saying that our way of achieving it. We are.
I don't know what it is, though. That's the problem, Jay. I don't know what your aims of achieving the goal is.
What I would suggest doing then, Andy, is listening back to this podcast, because I have set out what we've been trying to do to achieve this. And also, Andy, as John set out at the very beginning, about whether this was a pressing thing during the Hicks and Gillette campaign or whether this was for an ultimate aim. This could be something that presents itself because of changes in legislation, because the finances of football significantly change in the next 10 years. Let's look at Italy. People say, the arse will fall out of football at some point because, it can't just keep going on. The bubble will burst one day. I used to think that. I'm increasingly, I'm more likely to say that I don't think it will now. I think it's in danger of, reaching NFL, NBA levels instead of, following the Italy trajectory of down. But if that happens, there's an opportunity, in 5 or 10 or 20, 25 years to do that. Just because there isn't a plan on the table now to say, here's how you do it, doesn't mean we don't want to do it. Doesn't mean we aren't figuring out ways to do it. And if someone thinks it can be done now, please do. Please do come forward with the idea. But when you come forward with your idea, and as I think I've set out on here, people will have to listen and make their own mind up. There's reasons why it can't be done, and I could go into many other reasons why I think it's more challenging, the nature of our support. Our support is quite split. I've had, I'll cite this as an example because I think it's useful in the context. We are an organisation that have tried to make football cheaper and affordable for supporters. A cap on away ticket prices, the walkout and stuff like that. We have, amongst our own support, a big polarisation on whether they think that's a success, and again, some of the people who we've sort of referenced in here, you know, have scoffed at that idea that, you know, somehow this was a success, you know, in comparison to many others who say it was. You know, some people, as we've seen, are very anti-FSG. Some people are very pro-FSG, and I think most of our support probably fits on a spectrum in the middle, ranging from asks questions but thinks the good and just doesn't want the hassle anymore. So you're asking us to try and unite a group of people around in what is a very diverse and fractured support base. You know, as I said before, at the height of Liverpool's, you know, biggest ever problems, going to the High Court and possible bankruptcy, people didn't want to buy, you know, didn't think buying Liverpool Football Club was something they wanted to get behind then. Asking them to do it now at a time when, you know, relatively the club is successful is more challenging. And our experience shows you have to make it, for our supporters, and I think supporters at other clubs, you have to make it look achievable. And the price and where supporters are at and where the clubs are just don't for us at the moment. So based on that, we made the decision. Now, you know, it comes back to that point. If you thought in the next 6 months, Andy, there was a plan you could go and do that, then, you know, all power to your elbow. I applaud people getting up and doing something about it. But what the issue seems to be here is you want us to do that based on your say-so, which, you know, we're a membership organisation. Our members set policy. You know, nobody put a proposal forward to our AGM to do these things. No members put this forward about things they think we should do. So, you know, we have that challenge as well. You know, we are there to represent people. We had a full, you know, AGM discussion where, you know, someone raised the idea of supported ownership. We answered, you know, much the same thing here around, you know, the Anfield Road being as an opportunity, why it's a challenge. You know, I cited that example of the Euro Millions then. You know, it's a challenge. I think we'll get it in my lifetime. I genuinely think, you know, before I die, hopefully not soon, but before I die, Liverpool Football Club will have an element of fan ownership, whether that be a small stake or a significant one, and that there will be a supporter on the board. And I think that'll be to its benefit. But just because there isn't a plan for how to do that in the next 12, 18, 2 years that you believe is viable or you believe is enough, doesn't mean that people aren't trying to do it. You know, if we can get, you know, if, you know, for the sake of 6 months, there'd have been a perfect plan, wouldn't there? For the sake of, you know, 6 months ago, if Labour had been in power, you know, we'd have been appointing 2 people to the board of Liverpool Football Club. And the day that the club goes up for sale, we'd have been able to say to supporters, when it goes up for sale, we absolutely have a right, not an opportunity, a right to buy 10% of it. So these things can change and evolve all the time. And that's where we're at. You know, I just think if others have a plan, you know, please do, you know, pursue it and try and do it. But just because we've said it's not the way we believe it can be viably achieved doesn't mean that, you know, we deserve to be called out the way we have by some people as if like we're somehow not wanting to do it. And I think, you know, I don't want this to turn into, you know, well, you don't get to call us. People absolutely have the right to ask us questions, and I'll come on and talk about what we do and listen to that. But just because it's an idea doesn't mean it is the idea as well.
I'm not. Sorry, John.
Go ahead, Andy.
If you don't mind me coming back just slightly. I believe the skills required to achieve anywhere near part ownership or full ownership is not all in my head. This is why I was saying, come together collectively and discuss is it feasible to achieve said goal? That's all I said. How then that's mapped out and when it's actually set about would be irrelevant. I'm not suggesting right now that we start asking people to save up in a bank. I don't know. I don't know the answers. And given that you haven't got anywhere near achieving your objectives, clearly you don't have either. But I believe
that's unfair, that, because you're jumping from, you've just said that, you know, we just had a long, you know, an hour's plus conversation about how and what the challenges are and why.
It wasn't much of a conversation, Jay. I've been listening to you for an hour.
Okay, all right. So you don't need to, you know,
No, I'm not being.
You know, we've had a discussion then. You know, I've raised points on here about what the challenges are, and you're saying to me we're no nearer to doing it. Well,
any organisation, Jay, would need the skills around the table to discuss it. Now, I approach.
So now we haven't got the skills. This just seems like a bit of a thing. Andy, let me just explain something, because this fits into the point I've made before about what's happened since that. what's come about is people weren't happy with a decision we made democratically as our elected management committee to then say, well, we want you to do this. Well, you know,
Jay, we agreed to put an option.
We didn't. That's Andy. That's not true.
I don't know.
Isn't
I don't
true.
know. You probably preempted what I was going to say. When I left the meeting, we actually discussed collectively, me, yourself, and the other two chaps that were there, about putting together a presentation to your board.
Yes.
That's it. That's all I asked for, and you said, let's go ahead. Now, sadly, it didn't take place for whatever reason. It doesn't really matter. But we are today. All I'm saying is, I believe, and why don't you, as the representative fan organisation, ask the fans about fan ownership? Why don't you bring
a member? And here's another point, because this fits into a lot of the ridiculous criticism and abuse that was levelled at us at the time. We are a member organisation. Our members dictate our policy. Our membership dictates our policy. By extension, our work has an impact on the wider support base and on the appropriate issues, as, for example, the discussion on safe standing, or rail seating. You know, most people call it safe standing, but on the discussion and debate we're going to have on rail seating, that will include wider support, but ultimately our members will make a decision. We have continued, as I've set out before, you know, I feel we're in danger of going around the circles here, but we've continued to try and move towards fan ownership, the asset to community value stuff that presents an opportunity, continually raising it with Liverpool around investment in the stadium as an opportunity to do that, which has now come back. The Labour Party manifesto pledges, which we as supporter trusts pushed and got on there, continuing to raise it as part of the expert working group. Just because we're not doing your suggestion doesn't mean we're still not advancing it anymore. Now, I get you think that's the way to do it, but as I set out, we didn't believe it was. Now, if there's other people who want to pursue that, and that might change, you know, in a year's time, circumstances change, 6 months' time, circumstances change, and something happens to do that. But the idea of not pursuing an idea shouldn't be portrayed, again, you know, as the idea that we don't want to pursue the notion of supporter ownership, because that's not true. And you said before, we're no closer to doing it. Well, I'd argue, one, we are much closer to it, because when we sat down with the Premier League and the FA and others back in 2008, when Hicks and Gillette were in charge, the notion of leverage buyouts being good at football was fine. They told us that, you know, the fit and proper persons test that they'd done didn't need any revision. That's been revised. If you asked anyone now whether leverage buyouts were good, that would be scoffed at. Supporters have took charge at their clubs elsewhere and have demonstrated that they can do it. At the same time, there's been exponential growth in the Premier League, which has made it harder, if not nigh on impossible, to achieve a full supporter buyout at the clubs like Arsenal, Liverpool, Chelsea, Manchester United, even I'd argue to certainly Everton and Spurs and clubs like that. You know, it's nigh on impossible to raise such sums of money amongst supporters. That doesn't mean, though, that you're still not trying to advance that argument. That doesn't mean that you're still not looking at all the options. That's what we do as supporter trusts, meeting and talking regularly. Now, maybe one of the things that's come out of here is maybe there should be, you know, or there could have been better communication of what we've been doing. But sometimes there's nothing to say. And as I set out before, our experience of going to the supporters in the last 5 years and saying to them, FSG should give supporters a part of the club, has been scoffed at. Brilliantly, there's been a good reaction to the idea of supporters purchasing a stake of the club in relation to the Anfield Road development. Now, I think that's because of what I set out before, that you offer the club, one, it presents an opportunity to say that Liverpool get what they want, you know, and an Anfield Road development paid for very quickly. We get to give our money, and I think this is a challenge for supporters, we get to give our money to the owners in return for a stake, but that money doesn't go into their pocket or their profit. It is directly reinvested into something that we see the benefits of, i.e. an Anfield Road. You know, supporters will feel that they've paid for a bit of that, and they won't, because there are a range of views on FSG, as I said before. They won't have to think to themselves, well, I'm not getting involved in that because it's going into the pocket of John Henry and Tom Werner, and, you know, any one number of arguments that people will put forward to say, they haven't spent none of their own money, they should have done this or they should have done that. You will be buying something for the benefit of supporters. Now, I think that overcomes some of the barriers that I've said in the last 5 years have prevented us talking to people about that. So, you know, I don't know where that leaves us in terms of this podcasting conversation, but I think there's an opportunity to do it. We will still push to do it. How that is, is one for discussion, and it will be with amongst our members and at the appropriate point if opportunity presents itself amongst the wider support. And if someone wants to come to us with an idea to say, here's how you do it, but what we were in danger of doing, what Andy suggested of, a feasibility study and looking at different ways to do it, we do that already. We have a management committee, which anyone's welcome to stand for. Any of our members are welcome to stand for and get involved to do that, to try and push that forward and, and put proposals into our AGM each year about what you do on that. We'd be the first to have that honest and open discussion with supporters about what's happened so far, what we think of that, what the supporters think, what the members think, and shape that conversation, as happened a few weeks ago when we had, a range of proposals on ticket prices and, rail seating, a subject I never envisaged we'd have on an SOS AGM agenda in a long time, certainly not, in recent history because of what's gone on. But we have got that now because supporters wanted it on there, and the conversation shows so far, by and large, it's a very positive reaction to it from supporters. So, if Andy's got an idea he thinks what we should be doing, then, please feel free to send it in as, SOS and put it on the, agenda for our meetings as a policy option to not policy option to pursue because it's on our ultimate aims, but a policy option of what we should be doing to achieve that. We'd be more than willing to have that debate.
Jay, sorry, Jay. Again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to you or anybody. Certainly, Spirit-of-Shankly, I believe in what you stand for. I did try to do exactly what you said. I did come to you and meet you guys, and you did state. Sorry, let me finish my sentence. You did state that we would put something together to present to the management meeting. That's all I asked for. That was I believe that was the first step, Jay, and we agreed that. I walked away with that, and I was going to start working on it. But you mentioned me wanting paying. I didn't mention any money, or so on and so forth.
No, I didn't say you. I said you wanted the idea of paying for.
Oh, yeah.
The work that was going to. We wanted us to pay for that.
Jay, no, sorry, Jay. Well, actually, the Supporters Trust do support that sort of activity. As you know, I approached them, and they wouldn't go any further with myself because the Spirit-of-Shankly didn't want to pursue a feasibility study. That's what I was told from the main guy there. Had you give it the nod, then we would have been working on that very. Now, again, Jay, it's not any one man's idea that's going to achieve this goal. I mean, there's numerous ways of raising certain amounts of money. Why not sell 40% to the stock exchange, for example? I don't know what I would raise, 500, 600 million quid. You still own 60%.
40% of what, though? Because we don't own any of it at the minute.
No.
That's the challenge.
No, sorry. That would only take place had the opportunity to come about, Jay, obviously. I mean, obviously, if you're in a situation where fans were getting involved with wanting to acquire the club for the benefit of the club and the city, etc., you need to approach the table with a checkbook. I believe you need to plan for the future on that one. That's all I'm saying. And I believe, sorry, that's all I'm saying, Jay. Jay, you've got it as your goal, and it's a worthy goal to pursue. All I'm suggesting is to achieve the goal at whatever point in time in the future it occurs, you need to be in a position of strength. Now, I don't know how many members worldwide would agree with the objective of owning the club for whatever reason. I don't know. I think we should bloody find out, Jay. And the only way to find out is put it out there that you have brought your main objective, not to the forefront, but it's still there. And ask people, will they get involved? Give them the opportunity to get involved. Raising this sort of capital ain't going to be done on a 6-week notice or whatever. It's got to be planned for. And that was the reason for the feasibility study. What would it take? Now, that's a very reasonable suggestion, in my opinion. If you start out business, you wouldn't do it with that business plan.
Based on what you said there, as we said, as and when these opportunities come up, we'd have to do all that. And now there's an opportunity, or there's a conversation, began to take place amongst supporters based on what's been said about the Anfield Road development. All of that's going to happen anyway. All of that's going to have to happen anyway. We are going to do all of those things because there's something on which to do it on. So doing a feasibility study, 6 months ago, saying to supporters, do you want to buy a stake in the club? Well, do we know it's for sale? No. Do we think they'd sell you 10%? No. How much does 10% get you? We don't know. Our offer to people publicly would have been, well, a lot of don't knows. This was one of the challenges I said before. Share Liverpool had. I know, I'm just looking at the time here. I'm conscious of the time.
Yeah,
but,
I know you want to
wrap up. It's okay. I've got a bit longer, but we said, Share Liverpool were essentially saying to people, well, give us $5,000. Ignoring the issues that created, but they were then saying to people, well, is it for sale? No. Well, how much is it for sale for? We don't know. They went through all of these things.
Jay, I understand.
One second. No, 1 second. Let me just explain that point. And but this is why doing the feasibility study 6 months ago or 8 months ago wouldn't be an option, and was not something we pursued, because we would have had all those same challenges. Now, as I said before, now that this is on the agenda again because of the proposed Anfield redevelopment, all of what you're suggesting is going to happen. All of these are things that, we'll revisit. All of these are things that we'll have to do about, well, if you were going to buy 10%, go into the club, say, the first step is to follow up what Ian Ayre has said and say to him, you said this, which we've already looked to do. You said this. Is this the club's policy position? Because, we all have experience that Ian Ayre says some things that then, cause issue and aren't quite what the club wants them to say. Is this your position? What are you, for 60 million, what do you envisage we would get for that? Do we get, as you rightly said, John, they might suggest debentures and we'd be like, no, that isn't what supporters want. We think there's an opportunity for supporter investment. If they then say, well, you know what, that's a viable option, then what we get to go away and do is say to supporters, well, they now want to do this. Let's go away and speak to the experts. Let's go and have a conversation with Supporters Direct and the relevant financial and legal experts about how we create a scheme, because that's what it would be. It'd have to be a separate scheme that, Arsenal have done this in the past, but they've recently wound it up, but allows supporters to buy maybe different levels of shares. That comes with, I assume, some kind of voting rights. What do people get for that? I would be against the idea personally of get your access to tickets and stuff like that, because what you do is you just perpetuate the problems of ticketing, as I said before, at Anfield, as opposed to anything else. You're worse that for some people. Essentially, if you've got money, you buy your way to the front of the queue, and that's wrong and dangerous. What you get for your money. How many people we need at those different levels? What's feasible to get there? Because nobody's done this before. This is the point on the feasibility. Nobody has done this before. Not at a Premier League football club. Not for the levels of finance involved. Not in the sense of being supporters buying into something as shareholders. It comes with a load of challenges. We'd have to do all that, and there would be a big piece of work, because that would go beyond, naturally, our membership as an organisation, supporters who've considered this to be a good idea, that now it's in front of them, they think to themselves, well, and I'm plucking numbers here to give an example, who now maybe think to themselves, well, £250 or £500 or £1,000 is a good thing for me to do on this, because I get a share, I get to own a bit of Liverpool, but equally I get to pay for a stand that gets, more fans in the ground, that makes us more successful and, makes us better on the pitch, and all those perpetuating reasons why people will buy it. We will do all of that. That will naturally come because there's an opportunity. So I don't want it just fits on your point on feasibility, Andy, just to wind it up, in that will happen, of which there's an opportunity to do it. The reason we weren't pursuing it at that time is because there was nothing on which to hang this based on our experiences. Now, you disagree, and that's fine, but I just want to...
I don't disagree with anything you've stated and any experiences you've had. Hence the reason why I wanted to discuss these things with you, because you
think we should do it now.
No,
you think well, you did, because you asked us to do a feasibility study.
Sorry, we both accepted that the Liverpool Football Club will at some point come up for sale.
Yeah.
All I'm stating is, Jay, and it's not I think it's just a sensible suggestion. We should plan for that point in time. That's all I'm saying, Jay. Let's plan for that very point.
I think we're all agreed on that, and I think the situation as it presents itself at the moment is probably the best opportunity we've had in quite a long time, short of confirmation from the club that it is actually the case. And I think we all agree here that that the movements need to be made on it. And what I hope, and I know, Jay, you're pushed for time, my hope is that we can all work together. That all the fan groups that want to get involved will be able to play some part in it, and maybe finally get to the stage where we're able to buy some portion of the club, and get some kind of representation on the board. Guys, we're in 20 minutes into something that I know, Jay, you were keen to go and be gone after an hour, so I do appreciate
It's okay. No problem.
you staying on.
It's an important topic.
Yeah, and especially since there isn't a lot of information out there at the moment, I do appreciate you coming on and giving Spirit-of-Shankly's position on it and kind of giving us an insight as to what's going on. So that's pretty much it. So again, thanks to Jay McKenna from Spirit-of-Shankly for coming on, and thanks to Andy Burgess from Red-Road-to-Anfield as well. And I think you'll agree that it was quite an interesting debate. So that's it. Thanks, guys.